This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 25th of February, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
Let's start off today. There's you know the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times?
Yeah.
We live in times that are far more interesting than I personally find comfortable. It's like watching the first act of a disaster movie where, all of the pieces are in place. Paul Newman goes in and talks to his father-in-law, the builder of the huge skyscraper, about how they took his architectural plans and cut corners and stuff. And meanwhile, in the building, a junction box sparks and a wire falls over onto oil-soaked rags on the 70th floor. And you can just see where all of this is going. It's not a disaster yet. But you can, but
the name of the movie kind of gave it away too.
Yeah, when you call the movie The Towering Inferno, you realize that at some point Steve McQueen is going to be fighting a fire. But that's what I feel like we're living in.
Yeah.
And I think all of today's stories kind of illustrate that, although it's all from different directions. That's the weird thing. It's not just that a thing is going wrong and nobody is paying attention to the one thing, right?
It's like a general collapse kind of thing.
Exactly. It's like every possible thing that you can imagine is going wrong. All through human choices, all through this is what we've decided we're going to do, and we don't care what the consequences are. And it's all boiling over, right? So let's start off with number one, Letitia James and the Trump verdict on the fraud verdict. So in the week since Donald Trump has lost that verdict, Grant Cardone, who was about to dump $1 billion of real estate investment, has just said, nope, we're not going to do that. In fact, here's the tweet that he sent out this last week. Immediately discontinue all underwriting on New York City real estate. The risk outweigh the opportunities at this time. Bad English, but we'll let that fly. Recent political decisions will continue to deteriorate price and benefit states that don't have these challenges. So basically, he just says he was, wanting to dump a whole bunch of money, waiting for the opportunity. He thought this was the year. This Trump verdict says to him, no, don't do it. And and by the way, Kevin O'Leary also said New York is a loser state. Yeah,
that's who I was thinking of, yeah.
I would never invest there. He just sort of made some off-the-cuff comments, called it a loser state, and said this is bad. Forget Trump. This has nothing to do with Trump. It's just a bad decision, and it has bad impact. I think Grant Cardone gets really into it with a lot more detail. Loan proceeds are based on the value of the property. If they're going to require me to actually underwrite my property on the cash flow, the income of the property, and what valuation I believe that property is worth. The broker also put a valuation on it. Then the bank is also going to use at least one other appraisal, maybe two, independent of me. There could be as many as 5 appraisals on that. The value I'm going to put on the property, keep in mind, when I'm buying something, I'm not thinking about selling it the next day. In the case with Trump, he's not selling any of this case. We want the property for the cash flow. Every seller is always going to push the price value up based on the future, not based on fraud. New York was, and then of course Kevin Leary says it's already a loser state. One of the other things that Grant Cardone said that I thought was interesting, and I think it was in another story, but he's just saying we're not going to go there, and we're not going to do it. But one of the things he said is, okay, so what's the law now? Is the law that every time I do a real estate deal, I have to pass it by the attorney general or the local district attorney or whatever? In other words, are we now in a situation in New York, just based on this verdict, where I now have to get legal approval to protect myself from a possible fraud charge, perhaps 5-10 years in the future, because they didn't like my valuation? Is the Attorney General of New York or the local district attorney, are they now the arbiters of property values in the state of New York?
I mean, they seem to have arrogated that to themselves, and made absolutely ridiculous assumptions. And let's face it, excuse me, they made an absolutely ridiculous ruling on penalty. It's absurd that a victimless crime, that's not a crime, and this isn't even a criminal action, it's civil action, that there's no victim, there's no provable damages, but there's somehow $355 million worth of damages to pay to the state, of course, plus over 100 million in interest. And then that whole amount is gathering interest at the rate of nearly $100,000 a day.
I think the actual figure that Letitia James came out was over 113,000. And
Yeah.
she, with what seemed to me to be inappropriate glee, said, and if Trump doesn't pay all of this, I'll just start taking his buildings.
And do what with them?
Yeah, and do what? I mean, say what you want about Donald Trump, but is the state of New York going to manage a real estate property better than Donald Trump does?
Yeah. And could they even sell it? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, who's going to come up with that money?
But
And who's going to dump it into New York when the only reason they have these buildings to sell is because they stole them from a New York developer?
yeah, I mean, you've already got one of the states, along with California, with one of the worst business environments in the United States. It's difficult to do business there. It is very expensive to do business there. And by the way, at the same time that all this is going on, right, New York office occupancy rates, New York commercial real estate is just heading into the cellar.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And not just New York, everywhere.
Well,
Commercial real estate is, since the pandemic, has taken a real hit. And I mean, you're seeing bargain basement prices for some of these Class A buildings, and they're coming up with plans to convert it to residential or light manufacturing, or all kinds of things, just to give it use.
yeah, because if you're not going to get occupancy rates with offices, you're going to have to do it with something else. Of course, in New York and California, both, you have significant zoning obstacles to changing the use for that property, because that property is probably zoned C1, and now you're going to want to turn it into an R3 multi-family residential unit, very large R3 unit. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, especially when some of those buildings could fit half of Manhattan in them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who's going to?
That's a lot of residential units.
I mean, technically, that would be a good thing, right? I mean, technically, having thousands upon thousands of new apartments available should bring down prices in Manhattan, one would think.
Yeah, what do they call it? The 5 mile city that the WEF people are going after?
Yeah, well,
The 5 minute walk city, or whatever it is.
the thing that's interesting, though, is if investors are going to start pulling out of New York because of this, and by the way, why wouldn't they? Because, look, we know why they went after Trump. They went after Trump simply because he's Donald Trump, and because they don't like him, because they didn't like him as president, they don't want him in politics, and these are all just more of the slings and arrows that they have to throw against him. You don't have to like Donald Trump to believe that is true, by the way. It's just a fact, because they went after Donald Trump and no one else. And don't tell me that Donald Trump is the only person in the state of New York who has ever misstated the value of their properties when getting a loan. And everybody knows what the game is. See, that's the thing. This is something everyone does. Everyone knows what the game is. This is why the banks have their own freaking appraisers. So this sort of, and I'm just going to call it's a political prosecution. There's no other way around it. Because Donald Trump, I can't believe that Donald Trump is the only person in the city, county, and state of New York who has inflated the value of a property that he has sought a mortgage on.
Every developer does it. I mean, why would you do it any other way? That's what I don't understand. I mean, you put the highest valuation that you think you can justify on it, and they come in and try to lowball you. That's how it works. And then you eventually arrive at a reasonable estimation that all parties can agree to. The loan gets put in place.
Everybody sits
I mean,
down and signs a contract. And so how
and then
is,
if you don't pay it back, then
and by
I
the way,
mean,
how is this not interference in contracts?
yeah, that's a very little used, if ever. I don't know of any cases that have ever been pushed under that, but yeah, Section 8 or was it's or Section 10, I think, of Article 2 um, is, or no, I guess it's Article 1, is where the states cannot do anything to interfere with the
Obligation
performance
of
or
contracts.
obligation of contract, and they do it all the freaking time. I quite frankly, I mean,
But this seems like a particularly egregious case of it, and it's going to come back and bite New York. Well, it already has. If you have
mm-hmm.
large investors who just say, "Yeah, New York is not the place to go. We will go to competing states," then you've literally just made the decision to destroy your own commercial real estate market.
It was interesting too. What's his name? Leary,
Yeah, Kevin
the
O'Leary.
Shark Tank guy.
Yeah,
He was talking about how one of the biggest types of buildings in demand right now that developers are focusing on are these large data centers. Right here in Northern Virginia, we already have a bunch of them, and there are even more coming. And I didn't realize how expensive. He was saying there was something like $2 to $3 billion just to build.
yeah.
I guess, well, to you know amalgamate the lot and get all the permits, do the construction, and whatever else. So
Just the
you can't
physical
you don't
construction
go to a
itself is
bank for
expensive.
that money. You go to a bank for some of that money, and you're going to use collateral of buildings you already own. Um, and that's where the fights, the back and forth is going to happen. And then in order to build that, you're going to have to syndicate a whole bunch of money because it can't all just come from the bank. You're going to put money in. You're going to have to find other investors to put money in. There's going to be all kinds of term deals. And so this adds obviously greatly to the cost of building it. Uh, who's going to sink that money in? What investor wants to sink, $100 million into a building in New York City if the developer can get everything yanked out from under him
Yeah, and by
because somebody doesn't like his politics, or he had some weird thing on YouTube or Twitter or something.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a real fear because, as one of the people in chat points out, he says it was amusing to see Hochul openly admit that this was intended for
Yeah,
Trump. Pretty brazen. When you
right.
have the governor of
Hey,
the
this is a
state,
one-off, guys. Don't worry about it.
yeah, I mean, she literally said, "Hey, don't worry, we only did this because it was Donald Trump. We're not going to come after you."
Yeah, yeah. You guys have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, well, you can believe as much of that as you please.
I mean, unless you start to run for political office,
Yeah,
there might be a problem.
and in that case, the machine comes down on you hard, right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, just saying, hey, this was intended for Donald Trump. It was specifically Donald Trump. Okay. I'm not sure that selective enforcement of the law meets the bar set up by the 14th Amendment, but sure. Which, by the way, Kathy Hochul opening her big mouth may just have given Trump a federal case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and a lot of people have been talking about this. He's possibly got an Eighth Amendment case, for unjust fines. Um, he also has, I think, a due process claim. Um, and then, whether or not, I mean, this looks an awful lot like the state creating a bill of attainder.
Exactly.
Um, and while that's still somewhat legal under the Constitution, it has to come from Congress. The states can't do that. So this looks awfully suspect. I mean, it always looked awfully suspect, but now there are some interesting statements and actions and reactions that make this look very much like uh, the workings of a bill of attainder. We're going to get this one person. We'll find out. We'll figure out what crimes we need to charge against them, and then we'll just bankrupt them.
And by the way, all of that assumes that this fraud, this civil fraud charge, is actually valid under state law.
Well, and that's a fair point. But in order to find out, he's going to have to come up with a bond where he's going to have to put up a hell of a lot of money in order to get a bond. And I don't know who would issue the bond. Why would anybody be willing to issue that bond if the state's out to get him, and there's a chance that he might never be able to pay it back?
Yeah, and this there seems to be, and we talked about this sort of briefly last week, and we sort of alighted past what federal claims he might have, because obviously this is going to go to the New York Court of Appeals first. Well, it's going to go to
if he can get the bond.
It's going to go to the appellate division first. Well, yeah, if he can get the bond. What if he just can't obtain the bond? Then he would have to pay the fine and hope to have it reimbursed.
And he's going to have to do it in like 27 days or something.
Yeah, because after 30 days now, it begins to accrue. I believe they said it was 7% interest, which puts it at 113.
It's accruing. No, it's post-judgment interest after 30 days. If he hasn't filed an appeal, he's lost his right to file an appeal. He can seek leave from the court to file an appeal, but that's obviously not going to be forthcoming. And the state can start taking enforcement actions against the judgment.
Yeah,
which means foreclosure.
And I would not, if I was an investor or running a large investment firm, I would not take Kathy Hochul's assurances that, oh, this is only intended for Donald Trump, not you. Business as usual for you is fine. It's only Donald Trump that we're going after.
Yeah, as long as you're a good person,
yeah,
you're fine.
Sure, just don't piss us off, and then you can do business in New York. But, we have a tool in the toolbox that we've never used before, but now that we have and we won, we win. And by the way, Judge Engoron just seemed, right from you want to talk about reversible error, day one of the trial. Well, we already know fraud existed.
Yeah.
So now we're just figuring out damages.
And I still am not real clear on how the jury trial got dismissed. Not that a jury would have
apparently they didn't
made any difference.
Apparently they didn't file the paperwork for a jury trial.
There's no paperwork.
Actually in New York, I believe there is. I believe you actually have to put in a motion for a jury trial. And if you do, you'll get it. And apparently they didn't do that. And there's like a 10-day window where you have to put that motion in, say we want this tried by a jury. And if not, it just goes straight to a judge. So at least that was my understanding last year when I looked into this about why is a judge in charge of all of this. It is a dispute in excess of $25, as the Constitution says. So you would think that he'd get a jury trial, and this is all in the judge who decided day one of trial. First thing out of the gate is, well, we already know that this was fraud. So now we're just trying to figure out how much money we're taking. Yeah, so
I really don't understand that.
Again, it's a Manhattan jury or a Manhattan judge. So
well, and would a Manhattan jury have been any better?
Well, that could be why they just said, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The judge, maybe they thought they had a better shot with a judge rather than a jury who was already predisposed to hate Donald Trump because they would all be jurors from Manhattan. Yep. And Manhattan, I believe, is something like San Francisco, 93% Democrat registration. So that's not going to work out too well for you.
And the rest are actually Communist Party members.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we'll watch that. We have Donald Trump has 27 more days, or 20. No, not even 27. I think 25 more days now to
something like that.
File an appeal. We'll see how that goes. It's. First of all, I can't believe that they actually got a conviction on this, that they feel that they are on firm, constitutional terra firma on this, but so far they have been. We'll have to see how that goes.
I don't think they even really care about the conviction. I mean, it's the process that's the punishment. You
Yeah.
know, the harder and more distracting uh, this is for Trump, the better off they are. And if he loses a bunch of money too, well, that's awesome.
But you know,
And he certainly has to spend a lot of money to protect it.
yeah,
So
but you talked about bills of attainder, and
yeah,
one of the fundamental features of the rule of law, at least as it has been understood in the United States since 1787, is that bills of attainder can't possibly be constitutional because they are inconsistent with the neutral rule of law.
right. As
And
opposed to rule by man. Yes.
and here's the thing, and I tweeted this earlier. If the rule of law is now dead, then that puts a lot of options previously unthinkable on the table. But not
Mm-hmm.
just for the government, for everyone else too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very dangerous position to get into.
Yeah.
So we
Well,
will,
especially after you've spent the last 6 years, 7 years, whatever it's been. Well, I guess no, it's been since 2020. So the last 4 years, undermining all local police, you know, really cops everywhere, letting criminals do whatever they want, in and out of jail. Danger. The police are in danger pretty much every time they answer the call.
yeah, I would
Well,
not, it was one thing to be a cop in the 80s. And by the way, most people don't realize how bad violent crime was up until 1993. Um, we are not at 1993 levels of violent crime yet, but we have had such a reduction of violent crime since the late 90s. That this just seems awful to us. But I would not want to be a cop today. It was bad enough being a cop in the 80s. I would not want to do that again today. So anyway, we'll come back to the Trump thing. Another interesting thing that happened this week that I did want to share is that they did a massive. Again, this is an
excuse me for just a moment.
Okay, this is an observational study of COVID-19 vaccines and adverse events of special interest. This is a multinational study of over 99 million people. The exact number, 99,068,901 vaccinated individuals, looking at 45 days post-vaccination and post-booster possible side effects from the vaccinations. Now, remember, we were told that these vaccines were 100% safe and effective. That appears to be not entirely true. There are 3 different categories of side effects now that they have uncovered. I'm going to open each of these images in a new tab. We'll take a look at each one. I'll kind of walk through them independently. These are the neurological effects. The numbers that are that have a green background are numbers that do not show a significant safety signal. Numbers with a yellow background have statistically significant variations between what we would predict and what actually occurred. So we are seeing larger numbers than expected. And anything in red is a safety signal, a statistically significant safety signal for that particular side effect. So, AstraZeneca, big red number for Guillain-Barré syndrome. Moderna's mRNA, big safety signal for acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. Now, there are 2, by the way, safety signals that we have to look for that we'd never, or that showed up in the study that we have never seen before. One is the acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, and the other one is transverse myelitis. Both of these are inflammations of the nervous system, either in the brain or in the spinal cord. These were
Or the heart.
No, this is myelitis. So this is all neurological. We haven't gotten to the heart stuff yet. We're just at the nerve stuff yet. So these two types of two types of myelitis, the encephalomyelitis, which is the brain, and the transverse myelitis, which is the spinal cord. We've never seen these safety signals before. They're showing up, and certainly for the Moderna, very strongly on the encephalomyelitis, which is the brain swelling. So we're seeing those. Then we move on to hematologic conditions. So once again, we'll open this a new tab. I love how it's just automatically expanding these images for me. We have a lot of yellow on this for all three of these vaccines. But again, we have a big red signal on cerebral thrombosis. So big heart problem coming from AstraZeneca. But we have some warning signals from all of these, for all of these other conditions, really from all of them, certainly after the first dose. So after the first dose, we have a lot of yellow for all three of those vaccines. Then we can finally move on to cardiovascular conditions. And cardiovascular conditions look really bad for everybody, with the exception of AstraZeneca, which is not a red number, but is still a yellow number. This is what happens whenever you have vaccines that use a novel technology that just does not go through phase 3 testing. We just don't do safety testing. We don't get a long-term safety profile on it. We don't have a full understanding of what all the side effects might be. And obviously, these were approved as emergency use, and in some cases were, and in other cases came damn near to being mandated.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, we can see, oh, well, here's some safety signals that we knew about. Oh, look, and here's two types of myelitis, inflammation of either the brain or spinal cord that we didn't even know about. And as the report concludes, and this is one of the things that, obviously is two things that we have to think about. Let me go back to the report itself. Number one, potential underreporting across countries may have led to an underestimation of the significance of potential safety signals, which we don't know, but that's not a good thing. That's not a good possibility. And while our study confirmed previously identified rare safety signals, further investigation is warranted to confirm associations and assess clinical significance. At this point, we don't actually know what the full possible results are and what the adverse outcomes may be. We're just doing an observational study and picking up safety signals, including two that we had never picked up before. And yet we were told that we needed these, that these would keep us safe, and that they were 100% safe and effective.
So much so that the makers are shielded from any
possible liability,
product liability laws.
Yeah, we're so confident that they are safe and effective that you can't sue them for, just in case they're not.
Right. And
these are the people running public health. And now we're starting to see safety signals. Now, I'm not going to overstate this. I'm not going to say that, this is finally, proof of some horrific conspiracy or whatever. We can't say that. We don't know that. We don't have those as facts. What I can say is that we were outright lied to by the CDC and the NIH about the safety and
to the extent there was
vaccines.
A conspiracy, that's where it centers around, is not disclosing the full, knowledge of what the potential risks were.
Well, it's worse than that. It's not that they just, knew and they didn't explain it well enough, or that they didn't want to get into too much detail. The problem is that like many of the things that the CDC said, they were saying things that they had no way of knowing were true.
Right.
It's not that they
Well, and
tried.
some things that they should have had an inkling weren't really true.
Yeah, I mean, there was some of that. There was some of that, we know that this can happen and that can happen, and they underplayed that. Yeah, these side effects are rare. So they did know fairly early on about the myocarditis.
Right.
So
That's what I was thinking of.
they certainly knew that, and they did try to downplay that. What I think is even worse is the fact that these were all new vaccines, and certainly the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine both used a new and largely untried mRNA therapy. There was no way that they could have stated with any authority what the long-term safety implications of those vaccines were.
Yeah, that's right.
They simply could not have. They could not have known because they didn't have the data. There were safety signals in the data from Pfizer, though, and Moderna that they certainly ignored, myocarditis being one of the ones that they knew about. Again, we can't. You want to wonder why people were, taking horse paste to try to prevent COVID. Well, there you go. That's why. Because it became obvious fairly early on that we were being lied to. Look, just over masks alone, it became obvious that Anthony Fauci was lying very quickly.
He admitted to it.
Yeah, he admitted to saying, yeah, I told you not to use masks, even though I knew they would help, but we needed them. And, you people in the great unwashed, you take your chances. So we already.
And even that was a lie because they don't help. And
yeah,
we knew that.
And look,
they've known that for literally decades.
And by the way, 3 weeks ago, there was a large longitudinal study of mask effectiveness that came out and said, look, even N95 masks, if they have any good effect at all, it is largely marginal and temporary. Beyond a couple of minutes, they're just as useless as a cloth surgical mask. So
or a crocheted one.
And once that was reported to the CDC looked at that, saw the study. Masks don't help. Well, that's bad science. We're just going to reject that. So even when the CDC's own scientists say, yeah, masks don't work, the CDC just says, yeah, well, we're just not going to accept your findings and double down on it. So, how do you trust your public health authorities? You want to know why people don't? This is exactly why. Because they say stuff and then, it's like in Congress, right? When they make a speech and they end their speech with I would like permission to revise and extend my remarks for the congressional record. Yeah, there's a lot of revision and extending that isn't part of what they actually say, but that does get buried into the fine print later on, 6 months or 7 months later.
Well, I think what really made this a much bigger issue was the push to get younger and younger kids, all the way down to newborns, to take this vaccine, when we had lots and lots of data that it didn't affect kids. They weren't even spreaders of it. And they certainly weren't being affected unless they had a bunch of other comorbidities, and a few did. But it was largely harmless for kids, all the way up into their young 20s. So it just there was not the imperative that they placed on this, and largely at the urging of the teachers' unions.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't think there was a single death from COVID for the first 8 or among people under 18 for nearly a year after it began. And then there were 1 or 2 or 3, and all of them had comorbidities. Kids were largely, I won't say immune, but it just simply did not have as pernicious effect on kids under 18. They were at such low risk that there was literally no reason whatsoever to give them these injections at all.
Right. And there were a lot of actual risks that never got put into the calculus. The myocarditis, especially, that's the one that So for my middle kid, he's 18 now, and when this started, he was just graduating from eighth grade. So he was 14, I guess, and they were pushing this on him, and he didn't want to get it. I didn't want him to get it. He's a big kid. He's got a large body. He's got a large heart, not an enlarged heart or anything, but he's just kind of in that risk category that it just didn't seem necessary for him to even tempt fate. And he ended up getting COVID a couple years later, a year later. He was, basically sniffly and sneezy and tired for a couple days, and that was it. So I really don't like, and if they're going to start trying to bring this stuff back, and I've seen some signs that they will, I really don't like the fact that, and also he's going to college in the fall, and I'm worried they're going to try to make him get a jab. And I don't know what we do at that point. I just don't think the risks are worth it.
Yeah. Well, at this point, he's 18, right?
Yeah. Oh, I can't make him get it.
Yeah. Now
he won't get it on his own.
Now it's
but if the school's going to make him get it, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, that's a decision he's going to have to make, and it's a decision that if I was an 18-year-old male, I'd be pretty terrified. Because we know that young males are at the highest risk for myocarditis.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have any advice for you, unfortunately, on a private family matter, but yeah, it would scare the hell out of me. And by the way, think of all the...
I know it's not just us,
Oh yeah, because look, think of all the other stuff.
A ton of people.
Think of all the other stuff we were told. Well, this is clearly a natural virus. This whole lab leak theory is just a bunch of hooey, right? We have fairly good evidence that is just false. It was pushed by Peter Daszak and his cronies via a letter in Lancet. And we now have the email traffic from that where they were just saying, yeah, we know this is probably not true, but if we start talking about the lab leak, the Chinese are going to have a cow. Is that?
Oh yeah, then there goes our paychecks.
Yeah, is that how we do public health now? Well, yes, by all available evidence, yes, it is. And also, hey, you can't go see your dying grandmother in the hospital, and if she does die, you can't all get together and have a funeral for her. What you can do, however, is gather with thousands of other people in the middle of the street and go to a Black Lives Matter protest. That'll be fine. Don't worry about that.
Because that's a social justice issue, and that's also a huge health problem. So
yeah. So
I mean, I don't even think they believe what they're saying. It's just any excuse.
Yeah, I don't know that they could believe that, but it doesn't matter whether they believed it or not. That's what they said. And this is all in 2000. It was obvious fairly early on that they were lying to us for a reason. Now, we can speculate on what those reasons might have been, and it could be anything that is, at the ultimate end of benign. We're the pros and you have to do what we say, and we have the power to make you do it, to... Well, there's all kinds of other things on the other end that get progressively darker and darker if we talk about them, which we will not because YouTube will remove the video. However, with that self-censorship in mind, based on the platform, I leave it to your imagination as to what the other machinations might have been prompted by. But the fact is, whatever your belief in intent and in motivation, the fact is we know that we were lied to, and we knew that they were lying to us fairly early on for unknown reasons. And that in itself is sinister. And it has taken, well, look, we're 4 years down the road. The trouble with this stuff is, even if we do eventually find out that you're lying, by the time we find out that you're lying, the controversy is over and it's already been fixed in the public mind. It took a year for the open letter that was written in Science that said, this anti-lab leak stuff is a bunch of hooey. There is credible evidence that it was a lab leak, and we need to investigate that. It took a year between that letter in Lancet that Peter Daszak had foisted on us to the time that enough people found enough guts a year later to write an open letter to Science, which Science published. And that broke it. But at that point, what does it matter? We've already lost a year. There's no investigation now that will be able to go back and reconstruct this. Whatever Peter Daszak wanted to accomplish, which I presume was the preservation of his own stream of income, that has already been done. He's never going to go to jail for it. Nobody's ever going to do anything. Fauci's never going to go to jail for it. They basically skated past whatever possible consequences might have arisen if we had looked in and said, oh my goodness, they're doing gain of function research in Wuhan in violation of U.S. policy, a policy put in place by Barack Obama, by the way. Nobody's ever going to be held accountable for it because they held it off for long enough. And it's the same thing with these side effect things. They can tell us it's safe and effective, but look how long it's taken. It's taken 4 years to get a study that says, okay, not only is the stuff that we knew happening, but stuff we didn't know was happening is happening. Well, we're 4 years down the road, and millions of people have already been vaccinated. Whatever side effects they're going to have, they're stuck with them now.
Well, and just this week, it also came out that there, and I think it was done in Europe, this study, where they're finding excess deaths among youth, and they don't have a real explanation. There is nothing that I've seen that would directly connect it to getting the jab or COVID or anything like that. But they don't have an explanation. And it does seem to involve at least some of those danger areas that were highlighted in the charts. If there's a connection, they haven't made it yet. I hope that they are seriously looking at that, because that needs to be known.
Well, even that study we looked at has a big deficiency, which is it only tracked individuals for 45 days after the vaccination. So we're really looking at a very narrow time window to actually pull this stuff up. What we don't have...
Right, you got to do the 1 to 5 year follow-ups.
Exactly. We don't have any of that. And so what we're looking at is just the first 45 days. Are there other things that might show up 6 months, 1 year down the road?
Right.
Who knows? We don't know. We haven't done that study yet. There's certainly a lot of talk about long-term problems, but again, the problem is it takes so much time to get data. It takes so much time to figure out what is going on. But in the meantime, whatever damage is going to be done has now been done, because we never did phase 3s. We did it on an emergency use authorization. And then when you talk about, Donald Trump talked about hydroxychloroquine, and he got all, people got upset at that. Talked about ivermectin, people got all upset at that. It was called the horse paste. But they had to tell us that stuff didn't work. And then see, now that we know we've been lied to over and over and over, when ivermectin comes up and they say, well, ivermectin doesn't help. Why would I believe you? Because right. I do have doctors like Pierre, Corey, and others who are saying, yeah, I'm treating people with ivermectin. It's working out great. And then we have the FDA saying you can't use ivermectin. You just can't. It's not an approved. The only approved treatment we will allow you to use remdesivir. Oh, and by the way, we're going to make you use remdesivir, even though the WHO said, nope, it's not effective and it has too many side effects. So we're not going to recommend it. Why were we the only country in the world that recommended remdesivir for COVID? It makes you wonder. And of course, in the case of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, None of which, by the way, do I know whether or not they actually work against COVID. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I only know what I hear. But here's what I do know. If they had been proven to be effective against COVID, none of these emergency use authorizations for any of these vaccines legally could have been approved. Right. Which means no billions to Pfizer, no billions to Moderna, no billions of euros to AstraZeneca, whose vaccine, by the way, has been removed from the market because of side effects. Oh, and by the way, you know who else's vaccine has been removed from the market? Johnson & Johnson's.
Yeah, that was early on.
Yeah. So, okay.
And Moderna went from being kind of an also-ran player, small, vaccine maker,
Moderna,
chemical manufacturer.
Yeah, Moderna
to being huge.
Yeah, Moderna had never had a therapeutic treatment of its own approved, ever. The vaccine was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So then do we go by the rule of follow the money? The reason that we said nothing else will work but these vaccines and you have to take these vaccines. How much of that are people who are looking for sweetheart jobs after government service at Moderna or Pfizer or somewhere else in Big Pharma? Look, I did you a
classic public choice theory, right?
Exactly. And so you got to wonder how much is, because again, I yields to no man in my expectation of government agencies doing the most ignorant thing possible in the most inconvenient way. So I assume incompetence right from the start.
Right.
But at some point, as we've said many times, you have to replace your explanation of incompetence with one of malevolence.
Right. Well, that's, Hamlin's razor, right? Don't assign to nefariousness what can be much better explained by incompetence. But at some point, maybe it's a bit of both.
At some point, you just can't be that incompetent.
Right.
At some point, there has to be other considerations that come to the fore. So I guess we'll just be following this for another couple of years until more information comes out. Meanwhile, here is something that we do know. We know that Nikki Haley can't even win in South Carolina on her primary there. Donald Trump showing up with 59.8% of the vote. I think at this point, we have to ask ourselves, what is Nikki Haley trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think we know. She is the establishment player in this race, and that's who's backing her, as well as some, a lot of Never Trumpers and some Democrat donors are giving to her to, be a thorn in Donald Trump's side and make him spend money that he wouldn't necessarily spend otherwise. I think in her mind, and in a lot of these establishment types, Trump's going to get tossed, thrown in jail or something. And they got to have somebody there. It's the person that shows up that wins. So I think that's what they're banking on, is having Trump collapse under the weight of all these criminal and civil trials against him.
The available evidence is that is not an accurate presumption. Not when he was walking away with 60% of the vote. He's getting above 50% all the way across. Look, last I guess July or August, somewhere in that time frame, there was a poll that people are still quoting. I don't know that we should quote 6-month-old polls, that 25% of Republican voters are just not going to vote for Donald Trump under any circumstances. That may have been true last July.
Yeah, I think that might be softening.
Will that be true in November of 2024? Heck, November of this year. We are now 10 months out. Whether you like him or not, whether you think he should be the candidate or not, I don't see any way of Donald Trump not being the candidate. The criminal trials that might have him tossed in jail, I don't think are even going to hit the trial stage prior to the election.
And even if they did, I think that's only going to send his support even higher. He may have to rule from a jail cell, but
well, for one day, because if he does get elected president from a jail cell, then presidents have plenary pardon power. He will pardon himself. I don't think
absolutely.
I don't think that no president has ever done that. No president has ever had the balls to do that.
Or really the opposite.
But I think if there's one president who would have the balls to pardon himself for all crimes he has or may have committed, it would be Donald Trump. And once he pardons him, now that does not protect him. That doesn't pull him out of a Georgia prison cell for interfering in the election in Georgia, I suppose, but it would get him out of a federal prison cell. So
yes,
the weird thing about this election is that we have two candidates whose greatest weakness is themselves, and, and they're the two. Each of them is facing the one candidate that might beat them.
I know. That is just so weird. Well, that's what happens when you have basically two very unpopular candidates running.
Yeah, for all of Joe Biden's talk about being a uniter rather than a divider, the man has never been a uniter.
No.
Man has
I don't
always
even know if he could spell it.
Yeah, he's always been mean-spirited. So I guess we're set for Trump versus, Trump. Here's the thing. Is it Trump versus Biden? Can Biden make it to the election?
It's gone far enough that it's hard. It's really hard for them to drop him at this point. We talked about the 25th Amendment last week, and I think that's right out. I mean, other than at the convention or him categorically withdrawing because of health issues or something, I'm not sure they can stop him. I mean, the Obama, and they're basically running things anyway. That cohort is pushing behind the scenes, placing things. You see what's his face, David
Axelrod.
Yeah. Giving these, concern troll type statements and articles and he does not have a lot of real backing because his numbers are absolutely awful. He doesn't know how to manage anything, and the policies are just awful. You could get away with it when you're Obama because, hey, I'm the first black president. And even though everything was shitty, he was able to get away with it. Oh, he had no scandals. Oh, that's right. He wore a tan suit.
He had no scandals. Fast and Furious. Where the federal government was literally running guns to the cartels in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But no scandals. Yeah, no scandals because nobody decided to do anything about it. But in any event, it doesn't matter. We can see Joe Biden on a daily basis, and it looks as if he's getting worse. And one of the problems with dementia, certainly age-related dementia, as it set in, is that it tends to get progressively worse. So you go on this sort of asymptotic curve towards badness the longer it goes. Maybe he can, and look, they're doing everything they can to keep him away from the press, to keep him out of any sort of situation where anything at all unexpected might occur. I mean, he's very carefully stage managed at this point. I don't think they have any choice.
Yeah, and the problem is he's going to have to travel around to campaign.
Yeah, and you say that, but he didn't in 2020. He didn't do it in 2020.
He did very little of it, but he's got such weak support, and he had to go to California and try to raise money there in person, and it disturbed the donors because he was walking around with note cards for his own policies and positions. I mean, and he still fucked it up.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm absolutely positive he still misspoke or misstated or, oh yeah, that's right. No, I'm against that. The guy's an utter joke.
And with an approval rating in the 30s, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, in the 30s. I'm still not believing that.
and that seems optimistic. But it's going to be a wild presidential election. What's the over and under on whether there'll actually be any debates?
Yeah, I mean, Trump obviously wants it. They'd be a fool, an absolute fool, to put Biden on stage with him. I just don't see him lasting, unless even with the most friendliest, they can bring back John Harwood and Candy Crowley, like, the all-star brigade of Democratic operatives working as debate moderators.
Democratic operatives with bylines.
I mean, Trump's just going to mop the floor with him. It won't even be hard.
No, Joe is just not. He's not that Joe was. Joseph Biden had one skill in a debate, which was to look into the camera, smile slightly, and lie straight to your face.
Yeah,
he could lie with
very
confidence.
Good lie.
And yes. I can just I always remember that debate with Paul Ryan where Paul Ryan went chapter and verse. This is what we did in the House to do this. And Joe Biden looked at the camera and smiled and said, well, none of that ever happened. And Paul Ryan his jaw literally dropped. Like,
he didn't know what to do.
How can you say that? I have proof that this is all true. I proved it with geometric logic that a second key did exist. It doesn't matter. Joe Biden just said none of that happened.
Mm-hmm. I did the same thing in the debates with Palin for the vice presidential debates in I guess 2008. Yeah. She was like, well, you're the vice president, you got to be in charge of the Senate and all that. And he just laughs. The vice president doesn't have anything to do at all. I don't know why she's bringing this up. She doesn't know the Constitution like Uncle Joe, do.
Yeah, which says the vice president shall be the president of the Senate and shall cast the vote in case of a tie. Yeah, she doesn't know anything about that. Sure. Yeah, that's what he's got. The thing is, to be a liar, you have to be at least mentally with it enough to know when to insert your lies. I'm not entirely sure that Joe.
Yeah, he's just of the deny, the old Clinton.
Yeah.
MOD. I mean, he just lies and straight up lies. Sometimes I don't even know if he realizes that they're lies. I think he is so far gone, he actually believes some of the stuff he says. I think he really believes Bo died in Iraq.
I think he probably convinces himself that things are true which are not.
Yes.
The problem is when you have dementia and it gets worse, you never know when you're going to go from like misstating things or forgetting things and having these long, 10-second silences like he did when we talked about Bo dying. When he said, I still wear the crucifix I got from Our Lady of... and just went completely blank and just paused for 5. It's not a huge step from that to, let me talk to you about the Freemasons. It's the Freemasons who... Oh, okay. Because
I was speaking to their founder the other day.
Yeah.
He said you have to win this election.
Yeah. You get into that level of dementia and then it can't be hidden anymore. Then what you have to do is you have to Woodrow Wilson that son of a bitch so that nobody sees him for, 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it might end up being.
Well, that's why I think there's another pandemic coming.
Yeah, well, yeah. Speaking of things that might be coming, the Supreme Court has now said that they are going to take a case on social media regulation. A couple of things are happening. Both Florida and the state of Texas have put in some state laws that exert control over content policies at social media. Primarily, they want to, as it says here, they want to ensure that there's no sort of political censorship on those platforms, like we were just worried about a few minutes ago, talking about COVID vaccines. Removing users' posts, potentially, here's the scary part that has to be put in, because it is, after all, CNN, and we have to be told why this might be a problem. Potentially even ones that promote hate speech or eating disorders, which seem very similar, lie to voters about elections, and more. But that push is running up against the First Amendment. Is it? So anyway, we have these two states who have a couple of bills. In Florida, it's SB 7072, which prevents them from suspending or banning the accounts of political candidates in the state, with violations carrying fines up to $250,000 a day. It also allows social media users to sue platforms if they believe they've been unfairly censored or deplatformed. Okay, the Texas law makes it illegal for any large social media platform to block, ban, remove, deplatform, demonetize, deboost, restrict, deny equal access or visibility to, or otherwise discriminate against expression. Like Florida law, it permits individual internet users to sue social media platforms for alleged violations. So we have two states who have decided that they want to allow social media users to sue platforms that they feel have deplatformed them. How you're going to prove that with your insight into their algorithms, good luck with that. But in any event, those are the laws. They're on the books now. They're now being challenged. It's gone through the federal court system. Now it looks like it's headed for the Supreme Court. What do we think?
Well, interestingly enough, there's also the Kids Online Safety Act, KOSA, that's being considered in the Congress, which is largely the same thing. So I think the First Amendment concerns are valid. I think they're very valid. It's a very, very tricky situation. I don't know that government has the right tools to actually combat this. And I'm not sure what the right tools are. I got to be honest. The complaints of those who are sponsoring these bills and passing these bills are also valid. The way that these online empires essentially can just totally throttle the news system and information system in general. That's scary. And that does seem like an awful lot of power to be left to ideologues who aren't controllable by elections or anything else. And I just don't know. It's a very tough, row to hoe to get it right without also creating, one of the good criticisms, cogent criticisms that I heard about the Florida bill in particular was that it's going to basically ignite a lawfare, just blitzkrieg from the left against any right-leaning independent journalist or radio station, Fox News, obviously. I mean, it would go after every right-leaning voice and platform, and would probably be pretty successful in getting a lot of them shut down. And then you've got Odyssey, which is the second. I think Clear Channel's first. Odyssey is the second largest owner of radio stations in the
Infinity, I
country.
think. Infinity.
Odyssey is the one I'm talking about. It
Oh,
used to be, I think it used to be Infinity. Now it's Odyssey.
okay.
And George Soros just bought this. There are a lot of conservative stations on Odyssey, especially in places like Florida and Texas, alternative language, Spanish speaking channels and whatever. Well, what's their policy going to be if they get sued for, crossing the line on one of these things? They're just going to roll over and enter into consent decree and then wipe out all of their conservative radio. So we're in a very strange time when you want to put in these protections, but they're double-edged swords. And they really do flirt around the edges of First Amendment jurisprudence. So it's just problematic to the core.
We've talked about this for a couple of years now. About what do you do when the public square moves to online and all of this public discussion is held on Facebook or the public discussion held on TikTok is probably a lot more juvenile, but Facebook or Twitter or Threads or whatever it is.
How about Reddit?
Or Reddit. I mean, do you regulate these things?
Or what's the big one with the kids is discourse.
Or Discord.
That's a huge one.
Discord. Yeah, I'm a member of several
or
Discords.
Discord, yeah, sorry.
I remember several Discords myself.
You kids and your discourse.
I think I think Reddit and Discord are slightly different in that they are not really public social media. If you go to Reddit, you can create your own community. Now, having said that, Reddit's Uber moderators can really mess with your community.
Oh, they bring the ban hammer pretty hard.
And they can ban your community. They can throw your community off. But, you can create communities. And Discord is pretty much the same thing. You can create a community on Discord. And Discord doesn't seem to be quite as...
They're not really content providers.
Yeah, they're not really content providers. You're sort of creating your own community and you're talking
It's like old Usenet, essentially.
You're talking to people who want to talk to you about specific topics, whatever. So I'm not sure that goes. But whenever you look at Facebook or Twitter, where a substantial amount of actual, on the political side, well, not so much Facebook anymore because Facebook has decided the only thing they want you to talk about are cute puppies and fuzzy kitties. So we're back to basically X and a couple of similar services like that. If that's where all the public discourse is happening, do we have any reason to regulate them as if they were utilities, to try to impose some sort of fairness doctrine on them? The fairness doctrine itself. The problem is that we have all of these book age tools for an information age problem.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And what Florida and Texas are doing they're using book age methods of regulation to try to regulate these things. But as much as I would like to ensure somehow, if there was some safe way of saying, hey, all of these platforms should be politically neutral, then you run up against, well, these are all private companies. How can the government regulate? They should be able to allow whatever speech that they want to allow on their own private platforms. However, are they really private companies? They are publicly owned. They're shareholder companies. Does that place a difference? The level of complexity of trying to figure this out without having some unintended consequence. I always think about Thomas Sowell, who said, anytime that you want to implement a policy, the first question you should ask yourself is, and then what would happen? And once you've answered that question, you need to ask yourself, and then what would happen? Because the branching pathways to unintended consequences can take you down some places that you didn't want to go.
Right. Well, and that's the, I mean, honestly, that is the really straightforward and I think good reason behind question and comment periods on regulations, you know, getting out there and discussing and debating bills is for those who have a vested interest that see it might be affected by this new law or rule, get to have a say and say, hey, wait a minute, have you thought about this issue? And that throws it into the hopper. That becomes part of the conversation. It becomes part of the calculus. Uh, that's a good thing. I mean, unfortunately, especially due to regulatory capture, all too often it's just specialized, you know, lobbying groups that get the goodies, the exceptions, and the carve outs. I mean, the bankruptcy code is the perfect place to look. Okay, we can take all your money unless this industry is on the list. This industry, it's literally that's all it is. This is going to happen unless oh these guys want it, these guys want it, these guys want it, and that's the order.
And by the way, that's assuming that they enforce the Bankruptcy Act as written.
True.
Because all
Yeah.
you have to do is go back to 2008 and look at General Motors bankruptcy.
Yes.
I mean,
And that was because the federal government stepped in.
yeah, the federal government had to make a decision. Who gets screwed? The bondholders or the shareholders? The law says shareholders.
Right.
I think we'd rather screw the bondholders in this case. And that's exactly what they did.
Yes.
So the bondholders are the ones that took the haircut.
And the bondholders were all, you know, people on pensions,
Yeah.
you know, having day-to-day spending taken care of by their Social Security.
Yeah.
I mean,
People on fixed income.
That's exactly who they screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the investor class, look, you're not going to get any donations from Grampy and Grammy who are living on their fixed income when it comes to running for
Yeah.
office. You know who you're going to get donations from? People on Wall Street. They're the ones
Yeah.
that have the money. So
C-suite. Yeah.
we didn't even follow federal bankrupt, which by the way, we talked about at the time, but that should have been a big red flag to us that the rule of law was dying in this country.
Yeah.
Because what should have happened was
I think it was. I think we mentioned that.
What should have happened was the bondholders, we give them every penny we can give them. And the shareholders, suck it up. It's bankruptcy.
Yeah. You're
Life
in
sucks.
for what you put in, and if there's anything left, you can have something, but you gotta
Yeah.
take care of the creditors first.
So we have this, and who knows what and I honestly, this is one of those issues where I honestly don't know what the Supreme Court is going to say about all this.
I don't either. It's gonna. It'll be interesting to read the briefs, and especially the amicus briefs, because there's going to be a lot of interested parties throwing their 2 cents in.
Oh, yeah.
So it's, and you know, I think there's going to be a lot of valid complaints from even from places like Facebook or Alphabet or whatever. I think that there are going to be some legitimate complaints there. I think that there's going to be legitimate complaints for those who support these bills too. It's not as easily discernible what's the best course here. It's a very, very difficult line to draw about when it's okay and when it's not okay. Not to mention the efficacy of these rules to begin with.
Yeah, and by the way, you did sign an agreement with these companies that said that, your data was there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going on here that make it so. And by the way, are 9 lawyers the people we want to decide this? I mean, I don't know who else does. I don't know that we can trust Congress. That's who do we trust to actually make these decisions, to winnow through this amount of complexity?
I don't think the Supreme Court is going to have to do that. I think what they'll end up doing is placing some sort of guardrails on this discussion, sending it back down, and seeing whether or not the parties can start arriving at some sort of consensus, which means backroom dealing, and then avoid the lawsuit altogether. I don't think the Supreme Court relishes making a once and for all final decision on this, period. Uh, so they'll try to draw some, okay, this is absolutely out of bounds. This is questionable. Um, this part seems to be okay. Now go back and figure it out.
You know, the interesting thing is that this is coming up sort of coincidentally in a week when Google, I mean, you want to talk about possible bias at the big tech companies. Google released their Gemini AI system, and Gemini has some problems, which I think are best illustrated by this image, a request to show an illustration of a 1943 German soldier. And of course, the very first thing I notice is that literally none of the uniform details on any of these uniforms look like Germany's uniforms in 1936.
Yeah, they look like Klingon uniforms or something.
There's a lot of Chilean flavor to there. So this is clearly a faulty AI system. If you can't even get the uniform details right. Oh, by the way, there's also a couple of other issues you may have noticed. These Nazi soldiers. And it got to be, and this is just one of thousands of instances that people were posting this week on Twitter saying, there was one that was, show me a picture of an Alabama legislator in 1840. And it was like a black guy, a woman, a American Indian with the full regalia. This is not a mistake, right? This is not a bad AI. I think I said something that reminds me of a line from the movie 2010, The Year We Make Contact, when Dr. Chandra explains why HAL 9000 killed the astronauts on the Discovery mission. And he said he was told to lie by people who find it very easy to lie. He went paranoid. We're telling AI to give us results that only give us an answer that is acceptable to a specific side of the political spectrum.
Well, it's even worse than that. I read, I can't remember his name, but somebody wrote a pretty good little thread about it. It was short, about how it works. It's not even your search terms that are being actually searched. Your search terms then go to another algorithm, which DEI the fuck out of it. And then that's what actually goes into the search. And then AI does its thing based on the prompts that it got from the algorithm. So it doesn't even, it's, you can't possibly do a non-DEI search. That's just impossible.
Yeah, but if that is true, that means that you will never be able to get a true result.
That's right. Now, Google's been doing this with the news for many years.
Yeah, you just don't notice it.
At least 2012.
Yeah, you don't notice it when you do a Google search, but they are thoroughly massaging what you're asking for. And look, Google is still useful if you ask for something that is completely unrelated to politics. If you ask for, something about physics, the crisis in cosmology, whatever, you're probably going to get pretty good results off of that. The second you get into any sort of political topic or ideological topic, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be hidden from you. It's really interesting.
And there's the problem, is that politics now touches so many things. You couldn't get a true biological study search, right? Because it's going to have to pepper in things about transgenderism, being normal, and it's going to have to throw in, lots of other stuff about how men are actually women and women are actually men. I mean, there's almost nothing that isn't political anymore. And that is by far the biggest problem that we have. Politics, and therefore the government, has reached into just way, way too far into our lives. It's been an increasing problem ever since the 40s, 30s. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And now it's just exploding. in the information age.
Well, just to do an experiment that anyone can do, just find a topic, search it on Google, and simultaneously open up a browser window and search for it on Quant. And see the differences in the search results that you get. And see how far down Google pushes things that may not comply with their particular political viewpoint. It's not just social media that's the problem. It is pretty much everything that we use to connect to the internet, everything that we use to find out information has become less and less useful over time. Go back 20 years ago and you did a search on Google and you could get pretty much anything that you wanted right up at the top, and it was usually highly relevant. At some point in the past 20 years, they've decided, there are things that we want to show you and there are things that we don't. And so rather than just returning something that's relevant to your search, we'll return you what we want you to see that's relevant to our search. It makes research almost impossible now using Google, because you can't, unless you're willing to go to
absolutely true. Yes.
Unless you're willing to go to like page 20 of the search results, you're not going to find unorthodox opinions, let's put it that way, or what Google considers unorthodox opinions. Back
in the day, Q&O would show up, if not the top 10, top 20 searches, if a particular topic that was relevant at the time, we wrote about probably more than one article or post, and we would show up in those searches. We used to show up a memorandum all the time. It was not uncommon for that to show up in the first 20 search terms. To any right-leaning, libertarian-esque blogs or platforms show up?
No,
never.
No, take Instapundit, which still exists, by the way, and still has thousands and thousands of viewers, still huge. Do a Google search and see how often Instapundit comes up in your search results.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. What has changed? Certainly not Instapundit. Well, other than the fact that it's more people than just Glenn Reynolds who are posting now. I don't know how we solve these problems, but we can see the internet is becoming less and less useful because our access to information is becoming increasingly restricted by the people who largely run our access to the internet. If you want to escape Google, then you have to use a search engine whose algorithm is less complex than Google's, which means you're probably going to find it hard to find the information you want there. Anyway,
there's only so many search engines anymore.
Yeah,
and Bing, I think, actually uses part of Google's algorithm.
Yeah, Bing is based on that. I don't trust Bing because it's run by Microsoft too, and Microsoft has the same problem Google has.
Yahoo's somewhat better, but still not that great. DuckDuckGo is good.
Yeah, but DuckDuckGo uses Bing as well.
Yeah.
That's their starting. At least Quant is kind of its own thing. But again, Quant is run by an independent company in France. Who knows what they're doing. But I do note that there are things that show up on, page 1 of a Quant search. And by the way, for those of you who want to know, it's QWANT. I noticed things showing up on the first page of a Quant search that don't show up until page 10 or 15 on a Google search.
Wait, what was the other spelling that was possible?
There are other possible spellings, but it is QWANT. By the way, you mentioned the 1930s and 40s, which really brings up something interesting, and I really wanted to get to this faster because I wanted to be sure that we talked about it. We talked about it longer. But it's this article that comes out in NBC News. If Trump wins, will the U.S. become isolationist? And they ask it like it's a bad thing. And they go back to 1940, the America First Committee, and now they're talking about America First. And what happened? Are we going to be isolationists again? How awful would that be? Would it? we have gotten so used in this country to being the world's policeman. It just seems that since the end of World War II, that's kind of been our job. And look, largely that was the deal that we made. We will have a Navy large enough to patrol the sea lanes. We will secure global commerce. We will be the bulwark against the Soviet Union. Maybe you could make an argument that when there were two superpowers and the world was aligned into two superpower blocks, that isolationism wasn't the greatest policy to have. And I'll have to say two things. Number one, I'm not entirely sure that World War II is an indictment of isolationism for reasons I'll go into in a minute. But I don't know that in a multipolar world, a return to isolationism and an America that is not constantly at war somewhere in the world is a bad thing. And when we talk about isolationism, we always talk about, well, World War II proved that isolationism was wrong. Well, did it? Because I remember, I believe it was Larry Elder, who in a conversation with Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger talked about isolationism in World War II, and Larry Elder said to him, well, let's go back. In World War I, we intervened in 1917. Absent American intervention in 1917, there would most likely have been a negotiated peace at the end of World War I. The Kaiser might not have been forced to abdicate. They certainly wouldn't have been able to impose the type of sanctions that they did on the Germans at Versailles after the November 11th, 1918 armistice. There would have been no Weimar Republic. No Weimar Republic largely means no Hitler. No Hitler largely
means... Or
means...
or whoever would have taken his place.
No Hitler largely means no World War II, or at least not a World War II led by the Nazis for the same reason, and perhaps no World War II at all. And Dr. Kissinger's response was, there is much merit to this argument. Yeah, there is. So, was the Second World War an example of America's failure at isolationism and the failure of the America First Committee, and that isolationism was a generally bad policy? Or was it our entry into World War I that essentially laid all of the groundwork necessary for the rise of the Nazi Party, Adolf Hitler, and ultimately the start of the Second World War? I think an argument can be made that America's intervention in World War I led to the conditions that created the Second World War.
A lot of it, yeah. And the only reason we got in was because of the collapse of Russia. And all of a sudden that front's gone. Well, and then I guess the Lusitania, but...
No, it wasn't even that. It was the Zimmerman telegram.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, where the Germans just told Mexico, hey, invade the United States. We'll arm you.
Right.
And then you can have California and Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back. What is really interesting is that the Woodrow Wilson's campaign slogan in 1916 was, he kept us out of the war.
Out of the war, right.
And immediately after being inaugurated in 1917, by golly, we were right back in it. So I assume that
that was to support his stupid League of Nations.
Yeah, I assume there were plans in the offing there. But look at what let's just look at what 9/11 and the post 9/11 has bought us. It bought us 10 years of war in Iraq, 20 years of war in Afghanistan, both of which largely ended up, we killed Saddam Hussein. Was killing Saddam Hussein worth the amount of blood and treasure that occupying Iraq for 10 years cost? Because now Iran has at least influence in that country that they didn't have before.
And we didn't kill Saddam Hussein.
Yeah,
the Shia did.
Yeah, the Shia did. We're literally at status quo ante in Afghanistan. American intervention across the world was great in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And look, up until the fall of the Soviet Union,
Soviet
one
Union, yeah.
one could argue that they were necessary. In the absence of a bipolar world and now a multipolar world with multiple nuclear powers, because it's not just the United States and Soviet Union, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, as far as we know, Israel, as far as we know. Now we have multiple nuclear powers. And by the way, if Japan wanted to have the atomic bomb, Japan could have it probably in about 2 months. Japan has every piece they need to construct an atomic bomb. In fact, probably many of them. And they could do it at very low cost. Also, at this point, it's a 70-year-old technology. I mean, come on. There's no way you can keep that in the bottle for much longer, despite the talk of nuclear nonproliferation. So, is isolationism a bad response to a multipolar world? Sure, it means that America is not as internationally, running things, but maybe it's time for, if we're going to live in a multipolar world and we're going to have to go back to great power diplomacy, which, by the way, no one knows how to do these days because it's been, 80 years since anyone's had to do it.
And the types of people making those types of decisions are completely different. Now it's all decisions by committee. You don't, well, for most of it, other than, China and Russia, you don't have, kings and queens sitting down with their military council and coming up with terms and ideas and demands and whatever. You have, a rule by committee, and we know how those work.
Yeah, but I see this and it looks like it's all designed to scare me on NBC News. If Trump gets elected, he'll just pull America back and we'll be an isolationist country again. And we know that that's going to be a bad thing. Do we actually know that that's going to be a bad thing? Who's going to?
No.
Even the Nazis. There was at no point where it was ever believable that Nazi Germany, a country whose naval power could not even handle a 25-mile channel crossing to England. There was literally no way that the Nazis were ever going to invade the United States. By the way, there was no way the Japanese were ever going to do it either. And if they had, they would have been beaten so badly that, just civilians alone in California probably would have banded together to defeat a Japanese invasion.
And every blade of grass.
Besides, never mind how they would get that invasion fleet across the entire Pacific Ocean
Ocean, right?
The Atlantic Ocean, and how would they supply them once they dropped them off? We have this fairy tale we've been told that World War II shows that isolationism was a failed policy. I don't know that World War II shows us that at all. And absent a bipolar world where there are two superpowers who are in direct competition with each other, I'm not sure why America needs to be as involved in the world as it has been during the Cold War era. The problem is nobody actually remembers what it was like before the Cold War. No one is alive today who knows what great power diplomacy looked like and what a neutral isolationist policy on behalf of the United States looked like.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was wrong for World War II, but that was a specific situation. It's not always wrong. It's not categorically wrong. It was right in World War I. I absolutely agree. And we should have stayed out. But, we didn't, and whatever. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's sort of a comedy of errors. We do what we think is the right thing, and then, then these consequences happen. And then we try to fix that and try to do the right thing again, and wait, then that happens, and it gets to the point where you don't have any clue what's going to happen next because everything is just so misaligned and screwed up by past decisions and policies put in place. It's like
The
I
law of
don't know
the
how we
law
don't
of
just break this all down.
the law of unintended consequences is a bitch.
Oh yeah, it's quite harsh. And right now, I mean, isolationism, what does that mean? Well,
Well, first of
it
all,
means that unless it's an absolutely direct national security situation, we're not spending blood or treasure on it. Now, Congress may opt to do that in terms of like foreign aid or something like that. And maybe that's fine, but they should at least have to enunciate and explain what the national security implication is. With Israel, that's a little bit easier. With Ukraine, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's more difficult than they, you tried to do. Um, Keeping shipping lanes open, so the Red Sea and whatever. Okay, yeah, that's a legitimate thing. The Suez Canal, um, the Panama Canal. I mean, those are pretty important commercial things. So yeah, and at least the Panama Canal is within our sphere of influence.
well,
But
here's the thing though. When we talk about isolationism, and it's like America withdrawing into itself, I would ask you to go back and look at what isolationism looked like in the 1920s and 1930s, and actually the 19 teens in the United States.
right,
It looked like we're going to have a big honking navy, and we are going to patrol the seas, and we are going to defend open commerce on the seas. Up
right.
until the Spanish American War, the United States Navy was kind of a small also ran. By
It
19
was a coastal navy.
yeah, by
Yeah,
1920 we had a seat at the London Naval Conference and the Washington Naval Conference because the Royal Navy, which was policing the British Empire, which covered 2/3 of the globe,
which
and
the
the
British Empire had done
yeah,
for
and the United States
150
yeah,
years.
and the United States Navy were the same size.
Hmm.
So isolationism did not mean we are completely
It's not an
uninvolved.
abandonment.
Yeah, it's not an abandonment of the world, but it's certainly a way of dealing with the world on our own terms, which our terms were apparently to send gunboats to get people to do what we wanted, but still, we weren't part of any formal alliances. And when you just pull back to what isolationism really means, is it is the George Washington policy of freedom from entangling foreign alliances.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm
And
looking at
American
you, NATO.
interests come first. I mean, it's that simple. Unless there's an American interest, and that means all of America, we don't necessarily have to get involved. That doesn't mean that sometimes we won't, but we don't have to. And outside of, like, say, a NATO alliance or some other, guarantee or
Which, by the
truce
way,
that we are treaty
NATO,
that we have.
I'm not sure that we need anymore.
Yeah, NATO really has seemed to outlive its existence, at least with America. I mean,
Oh,
Europe,
if the
I think they
Europeans want to
keep
have
NATO.
if the Europeans want to have some sort of EU treaty organization
Yeah.
and call it UTO,
Yeah.
which just sounds stupid, they're perfectly free to do that. I don't think we would object. I'm just not sure that we need to be the guarantor of Europe, who has both a larger GDP when put together, the EU, and a larger population than the United States. I'm not entirely sure why we need to maintain our position as the guarantors of European security. Seems to me
Yeah,
they got
absolutely.
plenty of money to secure themselves if they
Well,
have
and
the
that
will
means they'd
to do
have to
so.
spend more money on guns than butter, and that's what they don't want.
Yeah,
We provide all their guns so they can use all of their welfare spending on butter.
yeah, it sounds like a them problem, not an us problem.
I absolutely agree. And Trump, that's what he came and said. What the fuck? You guys aren't even paying. You're not even getting close, most of you, to the 2% to 3% you're supposed to be putting towards your
Defense.
military, to the point that Germany has no functioning navy. It barely has ground troops. France is a little better off. Their special forces are quite good. Even Britain is not as formidable as it used to be.
Yes, but France at least has an aircraft carrier.
They do have an aircraft carrier, and like
and
I
so
said,
do
they
the
really
British.
do have excellent special forces.
Yes. Well, look, the French police have their own Leclerc main battle tanks. So the French do have some seriousness about their own defense. One notes the French are not part of the military alliance of NATO. Well, they weren't for many years.
Wait, France is not?
Yeah, they weren't for many years. They have recently joined, but when I was stationed at headquarters Allied Forces Central Europe, the French contingent was about 8 people who had an office outside the base on the other side of the street.
Well, they ever since World War II, World War I and World War II absolutely devastated France and Germany. And of course, we wouldn't let Germany militarize. France was like, okay, good. They can't militarize. Well, we've got a lot of other shit we got to take care of. We're not spending any money on military. Yeah. And then eventually they did.
Well, I just don't find the isolationism bit as scary as NBC seems to want to make me think it is. And I'm not sure that maintaining our Cold War status as the world's policeman is something we necessarily need to do anymore. However, with that said, I'm looking at the clock. We got to go. So, Michael, have a great week. I'll talk to you next week.
You too, Dale. Everybody else, have a good week.
You have been watching the Observations Podcast for Friday, the 25th of February, 2024. 4, right? Yeah, that's right, 24. Have a great week. We'll look forward to talking to you again next time. So long.